Peace is a lie. There is only passion. Through passion I gain strength. Through strength I gain power. Through power I gain victory. Through victory my chains are broken. The Force shall free me. Many have asked how my tits are so fantastic. The answer is quite simple. The dark side of the Force. The dark side is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. However, mine are as natural as they come. I'm looking forward to completing your training. In time you will call me Mistress. Oh no, my young Jedi. You will find it is you who are mistaken about a great many things. I'm Juliet Necro, your favorite dorky Sith lady. It's May, or at least it originally was going to be, so naturally you're getting a big Star Wars video. May is Star Wars month after all, and not just because of May 4th. The first 6 Star Wars movies were all released in May. It's always been the month of the laser sword movies. Naturally, this month I felt called to rewatch all 9 of the numbered entries. As of when I'm typing this sentence, I've just finished watching Return of the Jedi. I was very excited in particular to rewatch the prequels, because a friend of mine was telling me that in her view, The Phantom Menace is peak fiction. In my younger days, I admit that I was a prequel hater, but her insistence on The Phantom Menace's peak status made me curious. For the first time since I was a small child of 8, I looked at The Phantom Menace with fresh eyes, and found that she was right. It is peak, and not just from a certain point of view. The Phantom Menace and The Last Jedi have very similar stories. Now I've always loved The Last Jedi, and so my purpose today is to interrogate why 2 of the best movies in the franchise are also 2 of the most maligned. First, I will reveal just how fucking good The Phantom Menace is. Then we'll examine why George Lucas accidentally primed the fans of his own work to hate it. Episode 1. The biggest problem in the universe is no one helps each other. First of all, before I dish up the meat of this analysis, if you think the prequels suck because the effects are dated, you need to get the fuck out of my face. Should we not watch Sunset Boulevard because it's in black and white? That makes it dated. Should we not watch Godzilla? Suitmation is pretty dated after all. Should nobody play Final Fantasy VII anymore because of the PS1 graphics? Those are dated. And don't say to just play the remake because that's a different thing. Get a better argument, dork. Oh, and the other criticism. A lot of weirdos complain about the dialogue in the prequels. However, you're wrong. Yes, our lead characters talk weird in the prequels, but it makes sense when you remember that they're all liberals. Have you ever talked to a liberal? They don't talk like real people. There are characters in the prequels who talk like real people, and they're usually incidental working class characters, like the pilot of the Queen's starship in Phantom Menace, or Dexter Jetster in Attack of the Clones. The dialogue is part of it, actually. The Phantom Menace fucking rules when you recognize it for what it is. It's 134 minutes of the Jedi and the Republic planting the seeds of their own demise, which the audience will know is coming if they've seen the original trilogy, and which they'll see play out in dramatic fashion if they watch Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Throughout the Phantom Menace, the Jedi behave like sneering imperialist scumbags. They talk right past other sentient beings to speak to each other, as if no one else matters. When they first meet Jar Jar Binks, for example, Obi-Wan asks, "What's this?" He doesn't introduce himself to Jar Jar, he asks Qui-Gon, the person who actually matters in his eyes, what Jar Jar is like he's an object. Similarly, later on Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon refer to Darth Maul as an it, which you should not do unless the person you're talking to actually has it pronouns like yours truly. This is all not to mention how dismissive Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are towards Gungan culture during their trip to Oto Gunga. The Jedi callousness extends far beyond just language. Our viewpoint character's journey takes them far afield to Tatooine. Being out of the Republic's jurisdiction, slavery is legal on Tatooine. When the slaves Shmi and Anakin Skywalker find out there's a Jedi in their midst, they naturally assume he's come to free them. Jedi are ostensibly the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy, after all. However, Jedi are guardians of peace and justice in the same way that cops are, which is not at all. No Jedi at Pride, you motherfucker. Cops don't actually keep the peace, they protect property, and Jedi are much the same way. They don't do what's right, they behave in the interests of the capitalist state that they serve. No manumission is coming for the slaves of Tatooine. Not from the Jedi, anyway. They're also just, incredibly unworldly. Qui-Gon falls for an extremely common sales tactic by Watto, when the latter claims he's the only person who has the starship part that the Jedi need. Almost anybody would be wise enough to double check, especially when the person telling you that has a financial incentive for you not to check. The fact that Qui-Gon concocts a cockamamie scheme to get the part isn't a plot hole, dipshit. It's part of the point that he's an idiot. The haughty, above-it-all, holier-than-thou attitude of the Jedi is what will lead to their downfall over the next 2 movies and beyond. It blinds them to how obvious the threat against them is. They think they're so powerful that after finding out that the Sith still exist in this movie, they do fuck all with that information for 10 literal years. Had the Jedi truly seen other people as their equals, and truly been part of the world around them rather than separate from it, they likely would have been able to prevent the revenge of the Sith. Luke Skywalker says it himself in The Last Jedi. If you strip away the myth and look at their deeds, the legacy of the Jedi is failure, hypocrisy, hubris. Meanwhile, the Republic the Jedi serve isn't much better. The whole crisis kicks off because the Republic is completely incapable of policing a corporation that's nominally under its jurisdiction. I bet you thought taxation of trade routes was an irrelevant thing to set off a conflict, huh? While the Trade Federation occupies a planet and puts its population into literal concentration camps, the Senate is debating whether the blockade and occupation is even happening, because the Trade Federation, a literal corporation, has representation in the Senate like it's a planet. I don't know how much more strident a critique of liberal so-called democracy can get than that. Naturally, the Senate wants stronger leadership than a guy who talks about making a motion to start thinking about making an investigatory committee to verify something that is provably happening. The weakness of the Republic in the face of the contradictions of capitalism, its inability to rein in its excess, is what allows Palpatine to be elevated to Supreme Chancellor. The fact that liberal democracies never actually address what makes their subjects miserable, that being capitalism, is why they're so susceptible to demagoguery, which we're seeing play out all over the world right now. I did some critique of the Jedi earlier, but I have not yet gotten into my harshest piece, how they treat Anakin Skywalker. Anakin barely even exists to Qui-Gon until he starts to suspect that he's strong in the Force, that he might have the potential to belong to the same class as Qui-Gon himself. Once he realizes how powerful Anakin is, he gets distracted from his mission in favor of recruiting the kid into his cult. He makes no effort, of course, to take the kid's mother with him. The Jedi are so afraid of one of their own straying from the Jedi path that they try to prevent themselves from having any attachments whatsoever. Most Jedi are recruited as infants, so that they have no knowledge at all of their birth family. Anakin's recruitment is an edge case in that regard. When he goes before the Jedi Council to be tested, the Masters take an accusatory tone. Anakin has been plucked out of his context and away from his mother, and the Council treats him like a monster for feeling fear in this situation. I don't know many 9-year-olds who wouldn't be afraid in those circumstances. The advice of the Jedi Order throughout the prequels, and also to Anakin's son Luke in the original trilogy, is simply to suck it up. Their inability to provide any support to this kid dooms them. The only characters that show any real warmth to Anakin at all are Padme Amidala and Sheev Palpatine. Is it any wonder that Palpatine was able to exploit Anakin's vulnerability and turn him against the organization that emotionally abused him for 13 years? This movie is so fucking clear about all of this that you could watch it and then jump straight to Star Wars 1977 and more or less guess what happened in between. It fucking rules. Before The Last Jedi released, The Phantom Menace was the most disliked film in the series among fans. The absolute venom that the fanbase has for these 2 movies is linked. It comes partially from the same place. In The Last Jedi's case, it's because of the prominent roles that women and characters of color play in the movie, because a lot of Star Wars fans are idiot Reddit Nazis. Aside from that, though, the fans hate these 2 movies because they actually challenge us to think critically about the institutions and people within the galaxy of Star Wars. As I pointed out earlier, where The Phantom Menace's critique of the Jedi is implied, The Last Jedi outright states that the Jedi fucking suck. It rightfully questions whether an organization that fucked up so badly that it led to 25 years of fascism should even be allowed to return. The fact that it's Luke Skywalker who delivers this critique is another reason for the backlash. I saw many critiques of the decision to have Luke attack the young Ben Solo in a moment of weakness, dooming his new Jedi Order. It makes total sense, though. He's recreating a system that does exactly that kind of shit, and this realization of what he's doing in that moment makes him abandon the Jedi. Attempting to recreate the Jedi and the Republic as they were before the Empire is what leads to the whole conflict starting over again in the sequel trilogy. The whole point of the damn movie is learning from the failures of the past, which is why he comes around after seeing the future of the Jedi is in better hands with Rey. Rise of Skywalker fucked up this theme so badly that I basically consider The Last Jedi to be the finale. The Phantom Menace and The Last Jedi are essentially prelude and postlude to the rest of the story, critiquing the failures of the Jedi and the Republic at each end. The Force Awakens also exists, I guess. It doesn't really matter. Fans hate the idea that the characters who are presented as protagonists can be misguided failures. Please read some mythology or watch some Shakespeare or something, because heroes being flawed fuck-ups is basically as old as literature itself. After The Last Jedi depicted Luke Skywalker as a broken man haunted by his failure, fans praised instead his appearance in the last episode of Season 2 of The Mandalorian, where he's a CGI and AI monster who just walks down a hallway and fucks up a bunch of droids with a lightsaber. Not nearly as challenging a depiction. They weren't simple stories of the hero saving the day. How did we get here? Their critique of the Jedi goes all the way back to The Empire Strikes Back, so it's not like it's some Disney edition or something. Why do the fans not see that these movies are critical of the institutions that they involve? Episode 2. Mind tricks don't work out here, only money. Naturally, Star Wars exists as more than just a movie series. Star Wars is a whole all-encompassing brand, and basically always has been. And the brand aspects are where a lot of people get the idea of Star Wars from, rather than from the films themselves. There's a Star Wars product for almost everything you could possibly need or want. The YouTuber Red Bard made a very entertaining video about 6 years ago, asking the question whether one could live through a whole day using only official Neon Genesis Evangelion merchandise, and finding it more likely than one would think. I imagine that this is even more true of Star Wars. Before Star Wars released, no one but George Lucas and a few of his director buddies thought the movie was going to do well, let alone be a global phenomenon. Therefore, when Lucas cut a deal with 20th Century Fox to distribute the movie, he forewent $500,000 of his director's salary in exchange for keeping the merchandising rights for the film. Fox agreed, reasoning that no one would want merch for what was to them an obvious flop. How very, very wrong they were. Aside from things like toys, this extended to tie-in fiction. Marvel Comics published an adaptation of the first movie that evolved into a comic book series that went beyond Return of the Jedi, for starters. It also led to the publication of the first expanded universe novel, Splinter of the Mind's Eye by Alan Dean Foster, in 1978. Many, many, many more would follow. My favorites as a kid were the X-Wing novels. In 1991, the old pre-Disney EU really started to pick up steam when the comic series Dark Empire and the Thrawn trilogy of novels both began their runs. Now I want to be very clear about this. I really like the old Star Wars EU. I literally just mentioned how much I like the X-Wing novels. But to some extent, these works set us up for the backlash to the Phantom Menace and The Last Jedi. In both, and many of the other works in the old EU besides, the Empire gets a second wind and the Galactic Civil War continues in a new form. However, unlike in The Last Jedi, it is not due to the failures of the Republic, but due to the twinned Deus Ex Machina of Thrawn returning from the unknown regions, and Palpatine returning from the dead. Because the war continues for reasons other than the principal character's failure, they stop evolving. Yes, Han Solo and Luke Skywalker both become family men in the old EU, but they're still basically the same character they were in Return of the Jedi, even as the series gets close to 40 years down the timeline from there. That was why the fans were so royally pissed off when the new trilogy dared to try something different. People also fail to see how great the Phantom Menace is because they miss that it's supposed to be a critique of the Republic and the Jedi, primed as they are by so many stories that aren't critiques of those institutions. Video games are naturally a part of this ecosystem. All the background footage you've seen in this video is from 4 of the tie-in video games for the Phantom Menace, and that's not even all of the Phantom Menace tie-in games. In my last video, I talked about the fact that a lot of people treat video games more as toys than as works of art, and most Star Wars games are very much designed for that experience. Don't get me wrong, some of these games are all-time faves for me, but they do not hold a candle to the best narratives in this series. There is one example that stands far above its peers though, and that's Knights of the Old Republic 2. KOTOR 2 was released during the waning days of the prequel era, about 6 months before Revenge of the Sith, and it understands what the prequels are about better than almost any other Star Wars story of that era or since. KOTOR 2 depicts a Jedi Order and a Republic fractured by corporate power and their own arrogance, which blinds them to an obvious threat, and ends on a warning that all of this will happen again. In the old canon, this previous destruction of the Jedi is referred to as the First Jedi Purge. KOTOR 2 has the same theme statement as the prequels and the sequels. As long as the Republic and the Jedi don't change, they will repeatedly reap the whirlwind. It's why I think Atris is one of the best Star Wars characters ever written. She's self-righteous and absolutely unshakable in her faith that she is the one true Jedi. She is a perfect distillation of the vibe of the prequel Jedi, and she's an example of what the Jedi look like to normal outsiders. Brilliant work. Also, I like Atrus because she's an incredibly mean lesbian. Most of the Star Wars EU fails to question the institutions of the galaxy, because its purpose is to promote the brand. The Phantom Menace has, by my count, 10 tie-in video games. They exist both to promote the film, but also to squeeze more blood from its stone. Tie-in art occupies a weird space, because while it is art, it is treated by the entities that create it more like another piece of merchandise. Of course, to the bourgeoisie, all art is merchandise. That's why those fuckers love AI so much. If your goal is to sell merchandise, then it's best for people not to ask a huge number of questions about the morality of the characters in your story. People are much less likely to buy a toy lightsaber if they're thinking about the fact that it's essentially a cop's service weapon. Star Wars has always had attention at its center. There's stories that have been and sometimes still are resonant and have interesting commentary on liberalism and fascism, but they are just as often vehicles to sell merchandise. As much as I've praised George Lucas in this video, the guy was still a businessman in addition to a filmmaker. He got rich as fuck off the back of Star Wars merchandise after he cut that deal with 20th Century Fox. Star Wars prefigured a lot about the world to come. In the next presidential election after the original film's release, the actual Antichrist, Ronald Reagan, was elected president, and he said about his program of deregulation. His appointee for the Federal Communications Commission, Mark Fowler, relaxed the rules around advertising to children on TV, and thus many of the American cartoons of the 1980s were glorified toy commercials. Why do the clone troopers get new armor in between clones and Sith? New toy. Why does C-3PO have a red arm in The Force Awakens? New toy. They're not above this. Being made to sell toys is often the death of fiction being actually interesting, but the prequels defied this. Across the Pacific Ocean, a story has been playing out that really isn't so different after all. Episode 3. Now this is pod racing. If you spent some time online, you've probably seen a variation of this meme. Like Star Wars, Mobile Suit Gundam exists at a point of tension between its desire to tell an interesting, thematic, and deeply political story, and the mandate to sell model kits to preteens. In Gundam, the One-Year War is a conflict between two sides that suck shit in different ways, with Zeon only sucking slightly more. Our sympathies should not lie with the Federation itself, but with the White Base's crew, and also with, like, Char Aznable and a few other Zeeks that aren't shit. Minus Bright, fuck that guy. Also, Char Aznable did nothing wrong ever in her entire life, so jot that down. All my princess ever did in her life was serve cunt, urine lesbianically, and kill fascists. The wow cool robot effect, as I'm calling it, happens when people just want to see the cool action designed to sell them toys, without considering the within-setting implications of that action. It's why people that are stupid get mad at Shinji Ikari for not wanting to get in the robot, which is a transmisogynistic thing to ask her to do, by the way. I'd argue that despite the naming coming from Gundam, Star Wars has a much, much worse problem with the wow cool robot effect. As I said before, a lot of the old EU, and the new EU for that matter, is wow cool robot without anything going over the audience's head. It's just cool robot. Not all of it. There are great stories in both EUs. Please don't misinterpret me. There's nothing wrong with a bit of light entertainment, but I wonder if so much cool robot has completely cooked audiences' brains to never recognize the overhead implications. You hear a lot of people criticize the prequels for being boring and focusing too much on politics. If you believe this, you are weak. The actual plot of the film takes place primarily in those political scenes. They're not boring, they fucking rule, and you just want to have toys advertised to you. The old EU had so many simple heroes versus villains stories that you don't even realize that the Jedi are wrong. People call the Jedi's decision-making in the prequels poor, and that's part of the damn point. It's a trilogy about how they're dumb assholes who walked right into the obvious trap waiting for them. Even if you argue that you don't care about the politics and just want cool robot, there's still truly so much cool robot in the Phantom Menace. It has a space battle, it has lightsabers all over the place, it has Darth Maul, it has the fucking pod race. I don't see how somebody could call this movie boring unless they're one of those people who believes in turning your brain off. I'm sorry, but that is not something I do with art, and neither should you. Turning your brain off is how you get that wow cool robot effect. It's how you get people that are so excited for laser sword fights 24/7 that they completely miss the story that the laser sword fights are part of. Do you really think the Phantom Menace would be better if everyone did the logical thing? If it was just like a straightforward battle, instead of this weird murky story about dumb assholes not noticing what's coming down the line? Come on now. This movie owns if you think about it. It's just that Star Wars fans are deathly afraid of thinking about it. Simple as that. As I said at the beginning of the video, I used to be a prequel disliker. It took a rewatch at a later age, and at a time where I take movies and art in general much more seriously than I did as a younger woman. I think if you really approach The Phantom Menace again with an open mind and consider what I've said today, you'll find that it fucks, actually. It turns out that if you take art seriously, your experience of it improves. Till next time, remember that Star Wars is for women.